Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Keys to AWS Optimization, where we are talking about AWS MCPs and how you can use them to optimize your code or optimize your account, or even just have some estimates in how much you are going to be spending. So it's going to be a technical one today. We're going to take you all the way through from what these things are into how to use them in 3 different formats. But let's get started with our kind of fun question, which is, have you had a frugal week or an splurgy week? I forgot my own question then. In chat, let us know in the comments as well what you've had. I always want to see if people had a kind of splurgy or frugal week. But John, why don't you go first? Have you had a frugal week or a splurgy week?
It was a little bit of a splurgy week. So we just did, this was back to school for our oldest son, who's 5. He's starting kindergarten. So, a couple splurges on a pair of Nike Dunks for a 5-year-old.
Oh.
But, try to, help set him up for success, but a little bit splurgy.
That's so cute. Some little, these tiny little sneakers. I love that. Raul, what about you?
Oh yeah, for me it was a splurgy week as well. I had friends come in from New York, and then also had my girlfriend come in. So we went to restaurants and then shopping over the weekend. So it was a splurgy week for sure.
Oh wow, busy times this time of
Oh,
year.
yeah.
I feel like mine was quite chill. My big thing was last night. My friend was on a TV show called Location in the UK. I don't know. It's basically these people help people find homes, but it just meant it was a bit of it. Everyone was watching, so we're just having a little bit of a watch party to see her on TV, which is cool. Have you guys been on TV? I feel like at this point in our culture, everyone knows someone who's been on TV. But have you guys? This is a random question.
I haven't been on TV. No. Have you, Raul?
No, I've never been on TV.
But I was wondering, does it have the same weight to it now that it used to have, being on TV versus going viral someplace? I don't know.
That's true. If you had a viral moment, you end up often on TV after you've had that viral moment.
It's my nightmare stuff. I don't want to go viral, not in that sense, at least.
Does this episode go viral just because you said about John going viral?
Which would be great. I would like that.
Yeah. That's a good place. Love some comments. Had a frugal week. Family had a splurgy week, which I paid for. Love that. And yeah, any comments, questions, please put them in the chat. But love to hear it. But let's get into it. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS. Oh my God, I forgot what I was saying. Sometimes when I do the intro, it's muscle memory, and I just forgot what I was saying. I said before we started, I'm very tired. So let's try that again. Welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your spend at AWS. My name is Steph Gooch. I'm a senior SA advocate here to help you on your FinOps journey. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is John Massey, and I'm a principal optimization solutions architect on the optics team here at AWS. We spent the past, 5 years or so here at AWS helping some of our largest, most mature customers on their cost efficiency journeys.
Nice. And Raul, why don't you give everyone your 1-minute origin story for us?
Oh yeah. So hey guys, I'm Rahul. So I've been working with AWS for more 4.5 years now. I work in the billing and cost management space for the past 4.5 years, and more so I've been working on GenAI for the past close to 2 years, ever since GenAI took off in 2023. And I worked on billing, the cost analysis, the cost explorer capability in the Q developer, and then so very recently we also launched the billing and cost management MCP server. And previously I worked on the AWS Compute Optimizer product, working on optimizing solutions for ECS, RDS. So yeah, and that's been my journey with AWS. And then like I mentioned, for the past 2 years, I've worked enjoying the GenAI space, which is taken off really well. So yeah.
Yeah, if you're one of the people who started off GenAI a few years ago, I bet you're feeling really smug right now. You're just yes, everyone's coming to me. I love that. Also,
Raul's Well, I was going to say Raul's the person we go to when we have questions on all that type of stuff. He's been, really deep in on all this, both from domain area for cost optimization, but also agentic architectures, building out all the tools and, kind of understanding it from really deep level.
Yes, exactly. We've had some fun comments from Jeff. I've been on TV and a few movies. Jeff, have you been home now? And he's not told me that. I'm just you need to Slack me. Tell me what those are. And you're the only folks who have their own emojis. Yes, that is me in the emoji. If you're on Twitch, God, you could type. Twitch, that's me in the emoji holding up a giant dumbbell. Even I think I'm trying to even think if any. I played once. I was doing cricket. I used to play cricket when I was younger, and we went to a England match, I think at the Oval, and we got to play on the ground in the intermission, and that was like broadcasted. So that's my only thing. But I was like 15.
Oh wow.
Nothing since that. Yeah, chat. Let us know if you've been in on TV. Fascinated to know. Right, let's get into some of this stuff about MCPs. Raul, why don't you kind of set the scene for us and just explain what do these letters mean? Like, what is this thing that we're talking about?
So MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. So it's been launched by Anthropic actually came up with the MCP concept like in 2023 November, but when they launched in November 2023, it didn't quite pick up like another pace. But we started seeing it pick up in like February like 2025. So I mean, it started blowing up pretty quick, and then like we've seen a lot of MCPs mushroom like especially since the May of 2025, and then it's taken up really well. And so right now we have a lot of MCPs even within like the AWS space, like a lot of companies have that. So primarily like we need to understand why we need to use the MCP, right? Like so before MCP, like we had the concept of the agent. Like agent, as you know, you can think of it as an LLM, which is like or a system which is like intelligent with an LLM at the center. So if you were to think about like the LLM based applications, they're broadly like two different types of applications. One is like the workflows, and where you have the agentic applications. So in a workflow based application, you have a set of like predefined workflows or steps. So it's like one step after the other, and then you'll probably be using the LLM and like some of these components. But in an agentic architecture, you have the LLM, which is like acting like the brain or the central central brain, and then it's making decisions as to like what the next step is going to be. So and then the agent itself has access to like what we call tools. You can just think of it as like the arms and legs of a robot, right? Like so let's say if you have a robot which is the LLM being its brain, and the arms and legs like are like the tools. So let's say you have your one arm which is going to go search over the internet, and then you have another arm which is like, let's say, calling an AWS API, and then you have the other arm or your leg which is like maybe a database. So that's the analogy. And then so previously when we were developing like the agentic applications, correct? So we had these tools, but all of these tools were limited to, let's say, your own application. Meaning, let's say John built an application which was linked to a let's say database, right? And this is one of the tools that is linked to a database. Now this code for this tool is living in John's application, and then if I were to reuse the same one or want to implement the same functionality, I had to redo it all over again, and there's no way for me to like reuse it. And with MCP, what you do is you take this functionality, put that in an MCP server. Now John builds an MCP server and uses it for his use case. But if I want to use it, then I would be able to use that as well for my application. So essentially, we are trying to take the M into N problem, like different things with N different tools, and convert into an M plus N solution where you're able to reuse the tools, the agentic tools itself. So that's one of the really powerful features or concepts, which is why even if you look at like say the AWS MCPs, we build an MCP server with a bunch of tools, but now you don't have to do anything. You should be able to like reuse the MCP tools itself. So a lot of workload is taken off your plate. So that's MCP in essence. And the other big thing about MCPs is traditionally, if you look at APIs themselves, let's say if you're using an API in your application and you were to go to the documentation, you'll see a look at the parameters, the input output schema. But with an MCP, so everything is dynamic, meaning that if the tool description, the tool input output changes, the LLM will be able to adjust to it because it's all dynamic. So that's sort of the flexibility that we get with the MCPs. So that's broadly MCPs. And then given this flexibility and the reusability, that's why the whole MCP has taken off, and then everything is mushroomed. And I think we've seen a lot of good results with like MCPs in the FinOps domain, and even with like the coding and everything else. So
yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize it was so what do we call it, like recent almost that they kind of made this. I remember hearing it being thrown around earlier in the year, and I was like, I'll get to it. I'm sure it will be fine. There's a good question in the chat, but John, I want to kind of come to you. Who should be using MCPs? Who's the prime audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a use case, that's the number one defining factor if you should be using the MCPs or not, right? So um, you might see a lot about MCPs being published for all types of different tools, different use cases. If one of those works well for something that you're already doing manually today, you might be a great candidate to use the MCP for that. And there's a lot of different use cases out there. Like you can use an MCP just to interact with your email and use natural language, queries to ask questions about your email. That's a cool
Oh
use
wow,
case. If you're
throwing
someone
out there.
who is, yeah, working with large APIs, like Raul was talking about, and you don't want to go through and kind of code something to interact with those APIs, the MCP is leaps and bounds ahead of going through and like manually interfacing with that and having to define all this type of logic that happens there. So hopefully after today's episode, everyone's going to feel like they should be using MCPs. They're going to be excited about some of the examples. I think what's tricky with a lot of the stuff now is you'll see a lot of, MCPs that are being published and shared out, and it can be hard to figure out, if that's something that's going to be valuable to you, or is that something maybe that is more valuable, like, being used alongside another tool, or is it just not really great for your use case, and sometimes you just got to experiment, play around with these things and figure out if it's something that's going to be helpful or not.
Yeah. And then we have this question here, which is, what is the best way to interact with an MCP? So today we're actually going to talk about 3 different ways to kind of do it. So I'm going to be doing it in my IDE, John's doing it in the CLI, and I was going to do it in Claude, which I didn't even know was possible until he brought a screenshot up. I was like, are you sure you want to show this? And he's like, yeah, this is what we're going to do it. So, but is there any kind of way that either of you, like Raul, that you recommend people go and interact with it first?
I think people can just use MCP, like the MCP servers, with any client of their choice. The MCP client, like it could be QCLI, which is an Amazon offering, or it could be like Cloud Desktop or Cloud Code, or like you said, Visual Code. So yeah, I think these are all the different opportunities, like different avenues through which you could use the MCP servers itself. And then even with the MCPs broadly, like so previously we were all used to the concept of like humans being the end users, but right now with the whole agents concept blowing up, your MCP servers, like it could be used by an agent or a human. Like if you have an agent, like autonomous agent that you have at your workplace or your own one, you could link this MCP server to that one as well. So yeah, the
Cool.
different places where you can use it. Yeah.
Brilliant. And then we have another question, which is, what is the downside of setting up all the MCP? So there's a lot, and we're only gonna go through 3 today. Is there like a downside? I'm assuming maybe it's a amount of like not energy but power or something, or memory needed. If you set up like every single MCP that Amazon has, is there a downfall to doing that? Raul?
Oh yeah. So the downside with like other using or having a lot of MCPs, like attached to your MCP client is, so let's say you have 3 different MCPs with 10 different tools. So you're looking at 30 different MCP tools, all in all, like linked to your MCP client. Let's say QCLI, right? So you have 30 different tools, and now when you have a lot of tools, each tool by itself, let's say as it's taking up 10 kilobytes, and then in terms of the tool description. So now that you have like 30 of them, that's going to take a lot of the context space. So one of the key points with the LLMs as such is context management, because LLMs by themselves like have a limited context window. Like it's grown like by a lot ever since when I started last year, we were looking at what 20K tokens. So we measure like the context in terms of the number of tokens. So it was
Okay.
like 20K tokens. Right now it's you're looking at like 100, 200K tokens. But the thing is, as you increase the number of tokens in the context, the quality kind of degrades, meaning the LLM's ability to recall the information. So which is why it's important that you kind of have the important MCPs in there, or the ones you want, and not kind of pollute the context like with too much of the tool description. So yeah, that's
Interesting.
the downside of setting up a lot of MCPs. So yeah.
Makes sense. Perfect. All right. So before we get into the demos, John, we talked about this before, but I wanted to dive into it. People who might be thinking like, oh, this stuff is all new, but we were talking about how this has been available for a little while, but may not be so obvious. Do you want to kind of touch on that point?
Sure. Yeah. And we're talking about MCPs today, but I think we can actually decouple some of the functionality from like the MCP terminology. And what I mean by that is that some of the functions we're going to talk about today, the stuff that Raul's been working on for a long time now, productizing that and turning these into features and capabilities. Some of those are available natively in the AWS console today, without having to go through, configure, and deploy an MCP. So, if we log into the AWS console and we want to be able to ask Q questions about our historical usage and cost and spend, that's a function that was made available last November, right around reInvent time as a capability within Q. And then this past June, similar functionality was created that would let Q talk over to optimization recommendations from the Cost Optimization Hub. But then those two functions that we just talked about, accessing historical usage data and then optimization recommendations, were made available in MCP form just this past August. So you might have seen the announcement, the release around that, creating the billing and cost MCPs that came out. So there's similar feature parity between the two of these. Keep me honest, Raul, but just want folks to know that you don't necessarily have to deploy the MCP to do that. You can get a lot of the functionality just natively in the console based on how AWS is making those things available to end users.
So today we have the Q developer capability. Like you have, so when you open the AWS account, so you should be able to see like a Q chat panel on the right side. So, and then we right now have the Cost Explorer and the Cost Optimization capabilities integrated in this. And then we have, so you should be able to get similar functionality in there. So the appeal of the MCP is that you now no longer have to just use it, get all of these functionalities in the Q AWS console itself, meaning if you want to use it, if you have a developer that's working a lot of times on the terminal itself or using a Cloud Core or QCLI, with the MCP, it's a lot more accessible to them. That's the value prop. But broadly, all of these capabilities are also available in the Q developer as well. So yeah. So in the Q developer, the users can see links to the different AWS consoles, understand what parameters are being used, more for transparency, which is very important in the trust building aspect of this one. So the customers understand how the LLM is actually thinking and getting the results. So yeah.
Cool. I think that's a good call out, being able to get the functionality where you need it. So if you're in the console and you're, want to figure out something about your cost, just ask the question there. And then you can also take the MCP and bring that right into your IDE. So if you're doing development work and you're building something out, you got a question about something, we're going to talk a little bit about the price list API and the CFM tooltips MCP today. And those are good examples of ones where maybe I would want to ask a question about the pricing, as I'm building something and making a decision on resource types or something like that. So yeah, having the functionality in different places, very handy. And then also you don't need to go through and, set up and configure an MCP. The functionality is also available in those other places like the console itself and Q developer, like Raul talked about.
Yeah.
So
and
this one, sorry, just to jump in on someone's posted in the comments. This isn't a question, but this is a comment. This is mostly likely a pro developer operation. I would say that what we're going to show today isn't. It's very simple, and we're going to explain a lot of the documentation. So if you're not in a developer kind of point of view, this doesn't mean you can't use it. But sorry, Raul, what were you going to say?
Oh yeah, go for it. So what I was saying was to John's point, when we're using the MCPs, so we're looking at the left shift mindset, and that. So a lot of times, even the cost and the optimization, you start building something and then you only realize the optimization opportunities once you're done building something. But with this, the MCPs, when the developers start using them, so even as they're trying to build the applications, they can start to get a sense of how much the application is going to cost. Let's say using an S3 or you're setting up an ECS, so you understand how much it's going to cost given your application, your configuration, and then that's the left shift mindset when you start thinking about the cost and optimization. Not as an afterthought, but as you're building it, so more cost conscious. So that's going to bring the whole FinOps mindset to building as well. So
yeah. All right, let's stop teasing this. Let's get into some demos. So I'm going to bring up your screen. So let's talk about, so this is we're going to be talking about the new MCP server, which I'll drop a link to in the chat, which was created. But do you want to briefly just mention what it is, and then we'll go into how you use it?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the billing and cost management MCP server. So this is the one-stop MCP server for all the AWS billing and cost management. So we have a couple different services integrated into this functionality, like budgets, your cost anomaly detection, cost explorer, pricing, free tier, cost optimization. So savings plans and RI utilization. So all of these features are integrated into the this one-stop like the billing and cost management MCP server. And one of the main like key features of the billing and cost management server is also that it has a SQL utility. So let me talk about this one. So if you look at the financial domain, one of the important things is like precision. Like, you want the numbers to be accurate. Let's say if you were to ask a question about like something which is more textual language, even if there's slight mistakes here and there in terms of like the verbiage, that's fine. But when you're talking about numbers where people actually make decisions, that's very important. You need the numbers to be accurate. And we all know that like, LLMs are not that great at like the math. Yeah, they're getting better, but they're still not that great at math. So which is why like we built in a SQL utility into this billing and cost management MCP server. So for two reasons, one is for the math part and the other is for context management. So what happens is like behind the scenes in the MCP, like API calls are made and then the API call data itself is stored in like SQL, like a SQLite database, which is like it's like a lightweight, like a SQLite database that's going to live like in your local. There's no network hops or anything. So the API response is going to sit in the SQLite, and now the LLM can like write queries as it needs to do like aggregation, sum, any kind of analytics on this data. So now the LLM no longer has to do the math on its own, but it's relying on the SQL to do the math, which is where you get like a very high accuracy answers, like in terms of the financial domain. So which is very important for finance. So and then also in the billing and cost management space, like you could ask a question like, hey, what is my cost for last 6 months, or analyze my cost for last 12 months, and then you could have like lots of services that you're using, and which would mean like there's lots of data. So like we discussed earlier in the session, like context management is really important. So as your context bloats up and you could be running out of context one, or as your context size increases, the LLM is also not really good at recall, meaning you start to see degradation in like the accuracies because the LLM is bad at recall. So with SQL, what happens is we're taking the entire API response and then putting it in the SQLite table, so that the LLM no longer has to, we're no longer dumping the entire API response context into the LLM context directly, but rather it's going to the SQL first and then the LLM is querying on the SQL, meaning you're reducing like the context size, which is like very important for context management. So these are the like one of the key things about the billing and cost management MCP servers. So yeah, let's take a look at it in action. So today, before we do that, like any questions, like yeah.
Well, how maybe it's a simple question, which is like, this is obviously Claude, which is just I know it's just like web app you can use. How do you connect it to your account so it can see access into spend?
Okay, you're talking about the billing and MCP server. So I'll just show you an example of how you're connecting it, like the MCP server to Claude desktop here. This is an example that I have. So for a Claude desktop application, you go to settings and then you go to the developer. And then this is where you can configure your billing MCP servers, any MCP servers. You click on the edit config file, and then you should be able to open it with like your text editor.
Okay, so we can't see it because it's on just a window, but it's in. This is where you do it. That's okay. Me and John can show our ones later, but you do it in there. Perfect.
And I was going to just to kind of play that back. So Raul, I know this looks like the Claude.ai web app, but you're running the Claude desktop application here. And
that's right.
It has MCP configuration.
Okay.
That's basically just I forget. It's a little JSON snippet that kind of defines the MCP components, right? And then
correct.
You put that in here, and then it's going to be able to interact with it. And I'm assuming that behind the scenes, it's going to use whatever your AWS CLI profile configuration is in order to pick the right AWS account.
So that's right. So in my case, like I set it like my default profile, and then you can set up the region, and then this should,
just like you would in your normal CLI, but this is the
right.
app, the desktop.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. I didn't even know I could do that. How powerful.
And I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Raul.
Yeah, the JSON blurb itself, like that we're going to use like for setting up, it should be common across like the different MCP clients, meaning it should be same for QCLI or VS Code.
I can show mine.
Yeah, it should be same for anyone of this. So yeah.
All right.
If you get stuck on the configuration here too, you can always just ask Claude or ask your favorite LLM. That's what makes it a little bit easier too, right?
John, I thought you were going to say email cost optimization at amazon.com for any questions, which you can do.
That's it. Reach out. Yeah, let us know. Is it working for you? Do you like it?
Awesome. Okay, so what are we asking it?
So, okay, I just put this like a slightly bigger one, but let's try this out.
Okay, so analyze my cost and put it into a 2-paragraph narrative for a persona. Great prompt engineering there with who you're writing it for. Loving the formatting, some good stuff. And so it's going into Cost Explorer and goes and gets that data. Nice.
So it's calling like the different MCP tools. So it's calling the Cost Explorer, it's calling cost anomalies, getting your cost anomalies for the period. So if, as you can see, and now it's also checking for your budgets. So it's using like the cost optimization hub, like list recommendation summaries API for getting the optimization recommendations. So as you can see, like once you hook up this MCP server, which is having like a bunch of MCP tools like related to different services, like Cost Explorer, budgets, cost anomalies, optimization, free tier, pricing. So all of these different services are baked into this MCP server, which is like for billing and cost management. As you can see, it's been calling like a couple different optimization. It's trying to get all of the optimization data as well, because we asked it to how to optimize the lower costs and like major changes and anomalies. So it's trying to do all of this. So yeah, when you hook up like the MCP server to your agent, like the agent, like, and in this case, like the Cloud desktop, it gets to use like which tools it wants until like, it goes in a loop until it's satisfied that it has enough data to give you a final answer, and it just keeps calling like different MCP tools. So yeah.
But Raul, just to clarify, so that like kind of thinking process and reaching back out to the APIs, that's being defined by the client, not by the MCP itself, right?
That's right. That's right. So it's being defined by the client. So think of it this way: you have like 10 tools. The agent has access to 10 tools, assuming it's 10 tools. Now the agent gets to decide like which tools it wants to use, and then however many times it wants to use these tools. So the agent will use these tools until it thinks like it has all of the enough data to answer your question. So yeah.
Cool.
Okay, cool. And while this is just loading, we have another question, which is, does it cost money to run the MCP queries, as the Cost Explorer API costs money? So it looks like, because those are like API calls, and I believe it's still the case, doing API calls to Cost Explorer did like incur a cost. Does it cost money to use the MPC if it's doing those things?
Well, so this would cost money in that like you're using the user would be using their own profile and then the credentials. So it would be just like any other regular API calls. So yeah.
So it would cost to have those things.
Sorry, could you come again with the question?
So if go on, John.
I was going to say, I think what you're asking is like the MCP is going to be incurring the same API costs that you would be incurring if you were running those API, calls yourself.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
same thing. We just have the
MCP.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's something to be very mindful of a user, because it means that there is a cost incurred for doing some of these then.
And again, we could set up, budgets on these too, if we're going to be scaling these out across like a lot of folks, or you're going to be, taking these tools and integrating them back into like a Slack or something like that. And you think that you're going to be ramping up usage at scale, again, use budgets to go through and set, thresholds and alerts for actual usage and forecasted usage. And again, no cost for setting up the budgets on those, in order to be able to at least track and have visibility into anything that comes from this and give yourself some comfort.
That's right. So if you look at this, we have this AWS Cost Analysis Executive Report that we asked for senior IT and financial leadership. So maybe let's just take a look at this one, right? Our AWS infrastructure costs continue to show an upward trajectory of the last 3 months, with total spending from jumping from this much to this much, and then it's talking about like what's the percentage jump in the price in the cost, and then it's also talking about like the projected costs. Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, it's also talking about the projected costs. Yeah, so if you can look at this one, it's talking about like the primary cost drivers, and then it's talking about the potential savings opportunities that you have with RDS, and then all the other different ones. So yeah, we got an report like based on like our initial query. So yeah.
Nice.
I mean, try asking like another
awesome.
question.
And before you do, we have a question because I don't know the answer to this one. Do these results depend on LLM usage?
Okay. Could you flesh that question out for me? Like,
yeah, I think add some more context to the question. That's not from me. That's from a.
I think the way I hear that question is, is the model that we're using with the LLM going to affect the responses that we get back? So if you're looking at that report there, how could that be different if we're using a different model on the back end?
Oh yeah, so that's a pretty good question actually. So fundamentally, all of the LLMs, like at their heart, like you have the LLMs like with the agents. So depending on which LLM model you're using, like it's going to change. Like for example, if you look at Anthropic Claude, so there's a spectrum, like in terms of the intelligence of the LLM. So you have Claude Haiku, which is like on the lower end, and then you have Sonnet, and then you have Opus. So the trade-off with these LLM models is like the intelligence versus latency. So if you're using Haiku, then it's not very intelligent, but it's pretty fast. If you go with Sonnet, it's like, yeah, it's in the medium tier intelligence, but it's like fast as well. But if you go with Opus, it's like it's very intelligent, but you'll have to like the trade-off being the latency. So you'll have to make a choice depending on like what you want. If you're primarily shooting for accuracy, then you should go with like the best model or like the more intelligent model, and then that's going to make a difference in the answer quality. So yeah.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. So what else you got? So what was the new prompt you gave it? Sorry.
So provide the cost per GB month for S3 storage of the past 6 months. So this is the question we asked. And then like you see, it's used like this cost explorer query on like S3 storage, and it's got this data, and then it's been using SQL to do the analysis. And now it's once it's like, manipulating the data using the SQL, and then you now finally have all of the answers here. Like, if you look at this one, it's put this beautiful table together for us, the Claude desktop agent. So based on the data, so it's given us key insights like 2.3 cents per GB per month. It's talking about the regional variations, usage patterns, the region-wise breakdown, and then all of the recommendations as well. I think this is, so the primary value is like if you're developing an application, if you want to, like a lot of times as developers, you also have to make design choices. Like, when design choices, when you're writing design docs, you look at the architecture, you make trade-offs in terms of like the latencies. You also make trade-offs in terms of like say, the costs as well, and like which let's say data storage is good for you. So yeah.
I mean, that is awesome. And like I every time I see someone using one of these MCPs, it opens up like another use case that maybe I hadn't thought about before. And I'm looking at what you're showing now, Raul, thinking, if we were doing a stand-up meeting, or if we're doing a monthly MBR or QBR, we wanted to just get some data to kind of like talk about and socialize and see what's going on with the system. I mean, this is a lot of work for someone to go through and do this manually and pull all this detail, especially if we want to compare different months, different date ranges, different apps, different workloads. But you can go through, create all this stuff here, and just have it ready to go, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the value is like you can have a developer use this, or you can have someone like a financial analyst with not a lot of background in tech. Like they can simply chat with like using this MCP. They can ask questions in natural language and then be able to get any of the analysis that they want. So you don't need a business intelligence person like crunching all of the data. But right now you can have the LLMs do the analysis for you, even for financial analysts. So,
yeah, definitely. Because this is, and maybe actually I'll come back to that point. But if you're someone watching and you're like, oh yeah, I know what an MCP is, I have access to this stuff, I'm using it day to day, I'd go find someone in your organization who asks you these kind of questions and like see if you can set that up for them, because that's where the time saving in terms of optimizing your work and their work comes in, because you're no longer having to be that gatekeeper of information, understanding what these things are, what these tools are. We can make it just natural language and it becomes a lot easier. Maybe one thing to ask is, Raul, in there, I don't know if it does this, but say if you said to ask it about how do I save money? I feel like a question sometimes we have was like, I need to save money, what do I do? Does it have the feasibility to have a conversation where if I would go in and say like, how do I save money? And then it would say something like, oh, buy savings plans or migrate to Graviton. Can I ask it, why wouldn't I do that? Does that make sense? Does it have the understanding of like to balance out those when you would apply certain savings and when you wouldn't? I guess if it's using data like Optimization Hub, it would.
Yeah. So right now, like when you ask a question on like what savings opportunities you have, how you can reduce your costs, then it's going to pull you data from like cost optimization hub, computer optimizer, then get you the recommendations. And I think what you're asking is on like why you shouldn't be doing that. Like, is that correct? Like, I'm trying to better understand your question there.
So is it? It probably is smart enough just to understand, because I feel like when people, I want to encourage people to say like, go and ask it. Don't just take what it says for granted. So like you always have to not criticize it, but ask follow-up questions in terms of, yes, you might be able to save loads of money by moving to Graviton. You could also save loads of money by deleting everything. But like have those conversations, like use the tool to understand like what is good about that solution and what is negative maybe about the solution, and like have a conversation with it. Don't just take everything it says for.
Seth, I've got an example kind of like right in line with I think where you're going with that. We were using the features that Raul was showing right now, and we're looking at a list of recommendations for different right sizing stuff that's ultimately coming back from Compute Optimizer, and we could ask it, what are some questions that maybe I should ask the app owner here, as I present these types of recommendations over to them, and it will give you that extra context there, because there's, we're looking at, empirical recommendations, right? It's saying do this thing, but there's valid reasons for that. Maybe the workload hasn't spun up yet, so utilization is low, and it would give you some of those probing questions to kind of ask around those types of things. Or maybe you're sizing the workload for a period of time where there's going to be a heavy burst in traffic, and it needs to be you have to over allocate the performance, right? So it's really good at helping to give that type of extra context, where you might be looking at these recommendations and saying, is there a reason why maybe I wouldn't do this? Or is there something I should probe deeper on, that I need to talk to an app owner about that wouldn't show up in historical data, like anticipating some like future burst in the workload, something like that. So it's really cool for doing that. And that's where, we think about this as bringing a ton more functionality than just, pulling what we could get from Cost Optimization Hub API. We're getting like, some intelligence that's wrapped around it, around how to actually action those bits.
Yeah. For example, like if you ask a question on optimization, you can always ask it, like, let's say you ask a question about like optimization opportunities, or you can actually drill down into a specific recommendation and try to understand why you have that recommendation. For example, we asked this question here, this was a prompt on optimization recommendations, and then highest savings, and then it's talking about the top option you have, and then why you have it, like then what you should be doing, like what your next steps are. So it's giving you all of this. Like you should be able to ask these kind of questions for any of the other optimization opportunities as well. And then if you look at this, it's actually written all of this data because it's called like different APIs. So list recommendations from Cost Optimization Hub, it's got you all of the key insights, and then opportunities based on implementation effort and everything else. So yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm aware of time. I want to make sure we cover the other two. Anything else you want to bring up, Raul, before we finish on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'd encourage folks to use this. Like you have all of the billing and cost management features set up in one place, and I think this should be easy to use for folks to, like, you got a lot of functionality. So yeah.
Brilliant. I also, one more question. Because I'm now thinking about the cost thing we mentioned earlier, which is that when you run the API, it occurs a cost if you use things like Cost Explorer API. Can you tag the usage of an MCP?
Can you tag the usage as an MCP, as in meaning like for the account level, if they want to like see if all of the calls are coming from an MCP? Is that correct?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you should be able to like create tags like based on like, where the calls are coming from. Like you can use an user agent to set up like and track like, where your calls are coming from. When you create a Board3 session, you should be able to assign a user agent, and then you should be able to see that information. So yeah.
Okay, we should have a look because I'm intrigued by that. But I'm aware of time. I might flip the order, John. I might go next, just because we've seen the pricing one before. So I promised the CFM Tips team that we would make sure we had time to cover the next one. But everyone in the chat, if someone would be like, what's an MCP? We've got so much to cover today. I recommend check out the YouTube channel to see at the very start, like what we covered, everything, the whole intro explaining all these complex phrases and stuff like that. So jump back to that. Or ask your friendly neighborhood Amazon Q what an MCP is, and it'll explain it to you. So I want to jump into the CFM Tips library. So some of you, I'm sure, chat, have heard of CFM Tips. This is a cool website a bunch of people set up and we've contributed to. Actually, if we go on to, if I share my screen, you can actually see the first page has a video from this show, which is quite cool. This website is very cool. It has all these playbooks in which you can understand how to visualize and optimize your spend. So I really recommend going and checking out the CFM Tips website. But we know that you guys want to work in more of this AI world now. So we wanted to explain how you can utilize the logic from these in your MCP. So what they've actually done is they have set up their own, this is the Amazon one, their own repo, which is CFM Tips MCP server. So same as kind of the Amazon ones, you can take advantage of this and this lovely guide, which I'll drop in the chat, you can kind of utilize to find savings. And the kind of the cool thing about this one is that they've taken all the static steps from the website and converted it into code and then use that. So at the moment it covers just 4 things in detail, which is, or 5 things, EC2 right sizing, RDS optimization, EBS optimization, Lambda optimization, and general analysis. And through the future, we're going to look into things like S3 config and CloudTrail. But of course, if you want to feedback on anything you'd like, then you could open up an issue or request on this GitHub repo for this one. And let me make sure I share this on the YouTube channel too. Oh, 1 second. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like in terms of that JSON file that we were talking about earlier. So I want to make sure I share this. So this one has got a couple of different ones in it. So so the where it lives is a hidden folder in your AWS profile, wherever that is in your user. So you can go through and kind of dive into that. We'll make sure to share some links as well about how to set up this and how to edit the file, but you open it up as a JSON file and you have these little blocks of text. So the one we're going to look at is the one at the bottom, which is a very big one. So this one is a little bit different than the one we were talking about earlier because it's a local version. So I've actually cloned the repo for this one and I've connected it into a path that's localized. The one John's going to cover in a minute is you do it through the internet, so slightly different. So you can make your own. We're actually going to do an episode next quarter about how to make your own MCP. So make sure to subscribe to whatever channel you're looking on to make sure you see that episode. But what does it do? Well, this one works with Q Chat. So what I've already done is I've already kind of logged into an account down here. So I can just use Q Chat to connect to my QCLI. And this is where I can see, and you can see immediately my 5 MCP servers are initializing. So that's the CFM Tips one, that is the CFM one we're just talking about, and then things like the pricing one. And what I can also do is I can see I believe you can see my tools, and I can see what ones are still loaded, which ones are loaded. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time to load those things up. But when it comes to setting these things up, John Raoul, do you have any tips for like how many a good number is? I know we talked about earlier, like not having too many, but obviously they're different sizes. But do you think if anyone starts to be like, because I've got a couple now and I could see myself keep adding them if I'm not careful. Raoul, is there like when maybe people get to like a certain number, you should be like, okay, do you need all of these in here?
Yeah, it's difficult to pick a number because the context actually depends on the number of tokens in the tool description. Like you could just have 10 tools, but with very long descriptions, or you could have like 20 different tools with shorter descriptions. So it's difficult to put a peg on the number. But ideally, if you can measure the number of tokens like that's already in the tool description, I think that would probably be a good number, generally around like 10,000 tokens. So yeah, from what I've seen. So
yeah, interesting. So let's try a command in here. So similar kind of thing to what the official Amazon one is, but the main thing is that they'll provide you more of those steps, I think, when it comes to trying to optimize these servers. So I think it's trying to trust things. I mean, John, when it comes to the trust thing, I've forgotten why it asks you that every single time. Do you want to explain if you know? Oh no, it doesn't like some of my tags.
I don't have an exact answer, Steph, but I mean, I think when we see that prompt to ask it to trust the operation, we're security measure, right? To make sure that, the MCPs aren't going out and doing things that, we're not asking them to do. So just to give yourself some belts and suspenders and make sure that, it's, not reaching out to something from an MCP that you forgot you had running and, you didn't want to go through and do that.
I see. Okay, so folks, you know what's happened? The same thing that always happens. We got logged out. That's what happened. My credentials timed out, and so it kicked me out from doing it. I got too keen at the start to do it. So we're trying that again, and I'm going to ask a different question. So let me pull up and let's try that again and see if it will see if it can understand my query this time. The classic problem of doing demos live and you it tries to log in. So you can start to see, oh, it's still failing. I wonder what's wrong. I've chosen a bad command. Hey, wait. I know that I'm killing time. So, oh, we go. That's completed it. We will see. Here's some unused. Here we go. Okay, so it's running. So this has gone in and found those idle EBS volumes for me to go and look at. And immediately it's gone in and just found the IDs and provided me some information. What I like about this as well is if someone has said to you, like, oh, you need to go and figure out like where you've got idle resources you need to optimize. It's very quick in terms of I just want to grab that information and go and fix it. And I know there's so many developers who seem to hate going into the console. And so they're doing it in Q chat. You're already probably building in this place, like in Visual Studio. And that's why I like doing it in Visual Studio, because I'm keeping all of my code together. I can see what I've connected to, and I kind of take that information and constantly roll with it. Versus, I think Claude is a great example of when you're doing more business analytics of things and you need to write these reports. In here, you have to export it, and it's never going to be as nice as the way that it seems to be that Claude kind of puts it together. Oh, there's a good question you kind of point, which is there should be an option to disable the MCP. Is there an option to disable an MCP, or is it just delete it from the file?
So you generally, like with the MCP clients like Cloud Code or even the QCLI, you should be able to like put in a list of the MCP tools that you want to have, like not at the MCP service level, but at the tools level on the list of MCP tools that you want, like the agent to use or the MCP client to use. So you should be able to configure this. So off late, we've started more of these coming in. So yeah.
Okay, makes sense. All right. I'll stop there. So what I recommend, go and have a look at the repo and set this one up and compare, like see the difference between the two, see which one you like to use, and keep us posted if you have any others. But John, in the last 5 minutes, do you want to jump into the pricing one to kind of showcase that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one to kind of round us out here. So again, this is the price list API MCP that was announced on July 15th, so just about 2 months ago. And what this is allowing us to do is interact with the price list API, just as you might assume, right? To go through and do things like modeling out workloads or doing, cost comparisons, or even just exploring the pricing data set to understand, what opportunities there are around looking for different types of configurations that could be either more optimal for the workload or more optimal for cost. And about a year ago, Steph, there was an awesome episode of this show that you all did around the like open source, pricing tool where, we had a guest on that had talked about a website they built that helped you explore some of the pricing API data. And this is kind of like,
Frank.
Yeah, shout out Frank. And this is a year later now where, we have kind of all that just sort of embedded into like a smart brain that we can just prompt back over. And I'll give a couple of examples while I'm talking through this that you can see me run through on my screen. And I'm using this through QCLI right now. And I'm just going to ask it to use the AWS Labs Price List API MCP to address a situation where I want to explore cost. And we know that we can use the pricing calculator tool to get the cost for like an exact configuration, right? So if I know what my configuration is and I want to model the cost for it, I can use the pricing calculator to define out, all the different usage units, and I can define out, where I'm going to run the workload, all that stuff. But what if instead of, already knowing those resources up front, I kind of just know more about the requirements for the workload? So I've asked it here in my input prompt to help me navigate a horizontal scaling ECS workload where, I'm not sure what instances I want to use, but I do need 800 vCPUs and, 1.6 terabytes of memory. and I want to compare costs across all the regions that I have within North America, and focus on x86, but also show me options for ARM-based Graviton. So you could think about this as like, I kind of know what the workload looks like. I know what my requirements are. I know I can run it in anywhere in North America. I haven't decided if I'm going to run it in, US East 1, US West 1. Am I going to run in Ohio? Where am I going to run this thing? I don't even know which instances are going to be available in each one of those regions. So that's a pretty complicated task to do with the pricing calculator manually. But we've had the price list API go out and find a bunch of different options for going through and satisfying the requirements for this workload. So it's going to tell me how many instances I'm going to need to meet the vCPU and the memory requirement. And then it's going to show me a cost comparison for each one of these. And it's going to validate whether or not they're available in those regions. So it's giving me a regional cost comparison here where it's saying, US East, that's the lowest baseline, and then estimated, range that we would have for maybe like a potential like uplift on the pricing if we were to run it in Oregon or run it in central Canada. And then it's going to give us a bunch of other kind of comparison details that we have here so that I can start to digest this and figure out, which instance types I'm going to want to actually use for the workload. So just want to use that as like one example to start off with for using this. I like the fact that you can go through and do a lot of like iterative exploration with this. That's really hard to do in like a pricing calculator type tool. So I could say, okay, well, I want to change the requirements a little bit, or I want to look more specifically at, one or two specific regions that I'm going to run this in, or, balance some trade-offs and have it go through and look at those details. So that's a really cool way to use it. And I'm going to paste in just one more prompt that I have here for a different use case.
Before you do, John, just on that, the amount of times, folks, some of you might be thinking there, like, how many times, I used it all the time, going into the pricing page of a service and then like trawling through it and like, where is it? Let me just, especially the EC2 one, or I remember I was doing it for Bedrock and I was looking at all the different models and all the different types and then the prices and the regions, and it just is like, it takes a lot of time. And so this kind of thing is really
understatement.
Especially if you just want that quick answer. Like we're trying to save you time. And again, this is not to get started. It seems a bit complex, but I really encourage those non-technical folks who are watching to have a go. And I will again pop up my email, costoptimization@amazon.com. Any questions, please feel free to kind of reach out to us. But John, what was the next prompt you had? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I'll kind of continue what you were just talking about there too. If you feel intimidated at all by using any of these, I like the UX that you brought up, Raul, doing that within, Claude Desktop. It's definitely a little bit friendlier than, CLI. This is just my preference, but yeah, I'm going to try Claude Desktop after this and play around with that too. So try those things and just feel free to ask the tool too, like, what am I missing? Am I not thinking about something else? What are some of the assumptions that maybe you've had to make in order to be able to give this pricing detail? And that's going to give you even more additional context kind of on top of what you get back for the response, and help yourself understand it by interacting with the tool. And that's the benefit of this, is that if something's not clear, you can ask for clarification or ask it to do more. I'm going to give one other example here, because I want to talk about, like, we've got a lot of different options for using different services. This can be confusing. And in order to get clarity across a lot of this, I use this price list API tool to help me kind of understand the lay of the land. So I asked it here to use the price list MCP to do an analysis of Bedrock foundational model costs. And I wanted to compare the input and output token pricing, regional pricing, and then any other pricing variances across the models, so I can kind of understand, what cost-effective options are available. Because, a few minutes ago, Raul was talking about how, the LLM and the model selection, the back end, could impact the responses that we're getting here. And we know that there's a cost consideration that comes with selecting those different models. But if I'm not sure what the cost is for doing something like that, I can actually ask the tool to go through. It can help me understand, is one of these going to be an outlier where it's going to be much more expensive? Are most of these going to be not that much of a price difference for my use case? And then based on maybe a scenario like using the APIs where we're generating, responses back, we could ask it to help us estimate what the cost could be for using a tool like this. And right now we're doing the summarization for the context window that we were talking about earlier too. but it's going to roll back through and it's going to help do the analysis for me and say, hey, based on each one of these regions, this is which models are generally more balanced for input output token costs, which ones maybe skew more towards, input tokens or output tokens, and you can figure out, exactly what you want to do. So I really wanted to share that just as an example. We don't have to let this whole thing run through here. I had one last piece I was just going to show really quick from
and John, we've got very tight on time, so
if that's wrap, that's all good. I think our last call out here was that you can ask this to generate things like markdown files, right? So if you want table views and you want to be able to put this into a spreadsheet, that's the other thing that you can go through and have the tool go through and generate for you as well.
Yeah, this is very nice.
Okie dokie. All right. Thank you so much, guys. We've jumped through quite a lot today, but like I said, any questions, email costoptimization@amazon.com. Quickly going to do our secret Richard summary. So Richard watches the episode. He is not AI. He summarizes. So at the end of all the episodes, you can check out that little summary to see what we covered. I have not seen it, so it's going to be a surprise for me to read it out. MCP allows LLMs to connect to tools and act as a translator. I like that kind of imagery. Interact with data sources and tools in natural language. Reduce the intelligence required for business intelligence. I love that. And if you're not using the MCP server already, then now is the time. Yes, go and check those out. That is the big plug for today. Go and make sure that you check those out, as well as that. As always, places to follow. So make sure you check out my LinkedIn. We post updates about all these shows on there. Also, make sure that you go and join the Customer Acceleration Team group. I might have a new Twitch show coming out in the near future. So you might want to make sure to keep an eye on that channel to see where that goes. And finally, for summaries of all of the episodes that we host, go to Builder Center. Find me, the one and only Steph Gooch. You can either scan this QR code or search for me, and you'll see articles all about all of the different shows that we've done, so you can kind of get those quick story summaries. Okie dokie. That is it from us. Thank you so much for joining. Next week is our last episode of the season before we have a small break before kicking off into Q4. And last thing is, if we kind of reinvent, we're going to be there. So make sure to come and say hi, and we'll share some more information on sessions and stuff like that in the near future. That is it for now. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Bye.